We are very fortunate to have Anita Finday, the Managing Director of Indian Child Welfare, here with us to introduce our next segment.
Thank you, Cheryl. I just want to say I have the great honor of introducing these 5 fabulous Native women who are doing amazing things in Indian country. So I'm going to be really quick. And you have their bios in here, but I just want to say most of us had a chance to meet yesterday, and then I talked to others last night, and they represent just a wealth and a depth of hands-on work in the Child Welfare Agency. I'll start with Jade and just say a word about Jade. She spoke at one of our webinars on Family First just, I don't know, a month or 2 ago in Washington, D.C. And she's amazing, and she grew up in the child welfare system from age 4 to age 18, and she's got a lot of ideas on the way that things could be done differently. And next to her is Sonya Begay. Sonya lives in Washington, D.C., and she is raising grandchildren and has raised some grandchildren who are now adults. And she struggled to get custody of her grandson out of the state of Kentucky, and really had really struggled to get him out of that system. And I think she might talk about that a little bit. Shana King works at the Indian Child Welfare Law Center in Minneapolis, and I've known Shana for many, many years. She was in the child welfare system as a child, and she also had her children in the child welfare system. And she is going to, she works as a community engagement specialist for the Indian Child Welfare Law Center, and she's also worked as a parent advocate in the legal system in Minnesota. And then next to her is Robyn Wind, who is another person who has her grandchild in her care and who has really worked hard. She works in the child welfare system and is also raising a grandchild, and has struggled to meet the needs of her grandson within the system. And so she is very knowledgeable about the child welfare system from both her professional background and as a person experiencing the system. And then last but not least is Lisa. And Lisa is really famous in Minnesota for her organization called Equay Strong, which is strong women, strong Ojibwe women. And I was asking her last night, she does like a triathlon, a mini triathlon for Native women, and I was telling her I never signed up because I was going to have to do a back float for the swimming part, but she said I don't have to swim, so I'm going to do it this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys, and I think we're going to start with Jade, right?
Yeah. Shana.
Okay. Oh, Shana, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dosha, everybody. My name is Shana King, and I'm a citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes out of North Dakota. And I'm going to ask some questions, and we're just kind of have a discussion around it. And so the first question I'm going to ask is, to the panelists up here is, when you think about 10 years from now, what is your vision for an improved child welfare system, and what are the key values that support that vision? And I can start answering that. So 10 years from now, I would like to see more community agencies supporting our families instead of the government. I'd like to see more culturally specific programs. I feel that as far as the parents that I work with and for myself, culture is a really key factor in healing. And I think that Indian people suffer from a lot of trauma from our grandparents passed down to us now. And I can see that in my own life growing up in foster care, from having my kids into foster care, and how my grandma was somebody who had gone to boarding school, and how my mom couldn't parent, and so I didn't really know how to parent. So I think, in order for us to heal, we need culture. So culturally specific programs in our communities, and I would love to see our communities step up and help take care of our children and consider us families, not just focusing on kids, but focusing on parents as well, or grandparents, and supporting everybody before, the government gets involved and takes our children away. And with that, I will just leave it open for you guys to step in anytime.
Good morning. My name is Sonya Begay. I'm a grandmother who basically raised 3 children, my grandchildren, and they were taken away in Kentucky. The problem being especially with this particular, not the problem, but the question is, what I would like to do is make sure that we do not have to look at who gets the children. It definitely needs to be a process where it goes to a family instead, a family member. As Native people, we are culturally ingrained to have a family, have a foundation as a family, and I think the state needs to recognize that. Being in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the children were raised there, they were taken away. And I'll just give you my example is that they were taken away. I went to go see them the next day. They cut my grandson's hair off. He was 5 years old. To see that in my family, to relate it to my grandmother, my mom, and to the mother and say, your grandchild has no hair. His hair is gone. What do you do? And the child's just sitting there looking like something that came from boarding school. Right. We cannot allow this to happen no longer. So from that, I advocated to get the children out of foster care with Navajo Nation's help when they kept continuing to tell them, yes, we will give them back to the grandma. And it took me 9 months to get them. This should not happen. So within a time span of a decade, we should not be going through the same thing. And I hear that families are still going through the same thing at this time. So it's very heartfelt for me just to hear as a grandparent to know that there's other families going through this. And I excuse myself for being emotional because it still hurts. 2005 is when they were taken, and here they are, young adults. They've grown to be productive citizens and going to college and stuff. But I think there's many more families that cannot have that opportunity, and they've lost their children. So this should not happen. That's it. Thank you.
My name is Robyn Wind. I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation. I have had my boy Maddox in my home. I got him when he was 3 months old, and he is now 4. He's the joy and the honor of my life. One thing that personally I would like to hope that would happen within 10 years is that we have more prevention. I work in foster care as well, so the need for foster homes is, we need homes. But I'm hoping that if we could work on prevention at the beginning, then eventually there will not be a need for foster homes because we won't have to pick the kids up, and that's my hope.
Thank you, guys.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jade, Tillequots. And in 10 years, I would like to see the child welfare system as a safe haven. If we are taking kids out of possibly dangerous homes, they don't need to be re-traumatized when they go into foster care. A little bit about my background. I grew up on the Yakama Indian Reservation, and I had 2 placements. My first placement was really, really terrible. And it's just like, I got pulled out of my biological mom's home because of circumstances not the best. And then I went to this first placement, and I was abused, I was neglected, and it was just painful. We don't need to do that to children and youth anymore. In 10 years, I would hope that it'd end, and it'd just be better. I don't know, I've done great with dealing with all that, but there are times when it's just hard to deal with, and it's hard to process. And if we're taking kids out of dangerous situations, we don't need to re-traumatize them. So in 10 years, I'd hope that that ends. And I don't know if we can fix that, but it's a goal. Yeah.
Ahau Anishinaabe Duke. Lisa Shefte Indigenous Cause, Misqua Gamiwe Zaga Gunning and Dunjaba Gakabikang and Da. My name is Lisa. I'm from the Red Lake Nation. We reside in Minnesota. If you look at the state of Minnesota, you'll see a big giant lake, and that's ours. Well, 85% of it is. My grandmother passed away last November, and at the funeral, way up in Red Lake, the director of the family services for our tribe knew me from work and said, "You're related to this family?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And she's like, "We have one of your babies in the system, in your family." And suddenly, long story short, I was organizing a community event. The social worker dropped her off to me, and I was on a mission to build family around her. So I knew her mom. I mean, her mom is my cousin, and I also knew her dad. So I brought her to all her aunties, every auntie that I knew of, and said, "Hey, did you guys know she was in the system? Is anybody interested?" Because I was a second cousin, and I'm like, if someone closer to family wanted to step up, I was like trying to provide that right away. But the system, once they identified me as kinship placement, they stopped trying. They stopped trying to find someone closer or understand. And the kinship workers were revolving doors too, and they weren't from the community. So like for me, I knew that the dad's last name was from this res, on his mom's side, but actually he was this family connected on my res. So I was best friends with some of his sisters. But nobody, so long story short, we quickly tried to establish the safety of the family unit around her. And everybody was, the guardian ad litem was saying things like, "Oh my gosh, this poor baby was the baby without anybody, nobody was there for this baby." And I'm like, "You're lying. We were always there. We didn't know how to become engaged. We didn't know how to advocate. We didn't know how to go through the process." A lot of people think that they're not going to qualify for foster care, or they don't understand it, or they're scared of the system. And so I said, your workers lied in court when they said that they try to establish active efforts to find and locate family, because it was not that hard. We were all listed on their Facebook friends, like family, you know? So right away, my cousin, I walked her through the process on how to become back engaged, how to talk to her social worker, how to leave messages. She did overnights at my house because she was homeless, so she could establish visiting. She didn't see her daughter. She was taken from her at the hospital and was in the system for 13 months before she came to me. And once we establish care, we start going through it. And my philosophy is 100% reunification. It became clear to me that the system doesn't know what their philosophy is on reunification. They say reunification, but when the worker is in my house and they're not engaging with the mother and they're not engaging with the family, their actions speak louder than words. And we finally got a child protection worker who was pro-reunification. And everything started working out. And the baby and mom has been reunified June 7th, after over a year. And it was a long road. And I took her to her visits at treatment. I helped walk her through establishing contact with her social worker, even understanding what resources were available. She had a bout of homelessness for a while. And we worked together, we did it together. And because she was with me for over a year, my heartstrings, it started becoming hard to be family-centered. You know, because the heart becomes involved. And then And then I could feel myself being more like judgmental about standards of care of what my cousin could do for her. But because I practice centering, like centering myself, centering my bias, understanding my privilege and my lenses on how I parent and what I can do, it helped me ground in the fact of like knowing what is best for her. And I truly believe moms and babies belong together. And every single time I felt myself being judgmental about the care, about the standard of care, I would have to repeat that mantra in my head over and over. Moms and babies belong together. And I am her auntie, you know, and I'm her support system now. And when mom needs to fall back, we're gonna have trust. And so I think the future is like breaking down the system in order to like develop that sort of process with families that is like, I want to be able to interview the social worker. And if that social worker doesn't have a clear philosophy around reunification, then they can't come into my house. And if that social worker isn't informed on trauma or historical trauma, and they come into my house and threaten removal when I don't want to fill out the financial form telling them how much my house is worth, you know? And I'm like, I cannot believe that you would threaten removal. And she just triggered all my historical trauma. But you know what I did? I contacted all her supervisors. And guess what? In community, when I'm working with moms in my professional life, I'm like, this is how you talk to them. This is how you report. If you can't because you feel scared because they're gonna take your children, then how can I show up as an advocate for you? How can Shana show up? Because even conversations with Shana, she helps ground me in family, you know? When I start getting into about some kind of thing about the clothes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because you know, your bias, everything, your views show up, and if you don't do the work to unpack that, then I don't know. It's like remembering family, remembering baby, remembering mom. Real quick too on the future. I'm sorry. Okay. Just real quick on systems change, housing. In Minnesota, like upwards of 40% of our people are struggling with homelessness, and it really bothers me as Native people that so many of our people are displaced continuously still right now on our own homelands. And a lot of our families can't be reunified because they don't have basic housing needs met, especially when it's medical discharge, because I work at the hospital. And we have families who are struggling with homelessness, and they need to be discharged, but the hospitals won't discharge unless they meet the requirements for that discharge. And so a lot of our families are struggling, and they're forced, and the alternative is a child protection call. And once our families enter the system, there's no telling what their future may hold. And it's also, we need data and research to start looking at bias and implicit bias all around how the structures within the system around the systems perpetuate structural racism, and how like some of these the social workers that come into our home have had no work done to start to understand how their implicit bias might be impacting our families. And how does that show up, and how does that perpetuate further disparities?
Wow. So Lisa's really challenging me on my first facilitation, because I know I should be like cutting her off, but she has so many good things to say.
I'm gonna be quiet now, I promise.
No, don't be. So, I mean, I like those visions, and I just think, I mean, wow, what a difference kinship care is in family compared to foster care. If we can work on keeping our families together, I mean, look at the supports they're getting up here to, like they go to bat for their family that comes into their home, and a lot of times they do it without funding. So, I mean, with all these visions that we have, what is at stake if we don't move towards that vision? And I think that we're going to be on the continued path of the loss of our culture. I think that we need a lot of trauma-informed care and to start healing our families. And it's just going to be, we're just going to continue on with next generations being in the same situation that I've been in, and more kids in foster care. I think if we don't start looking at, our trauma and how we're being placed and how we're being discriminated against as a people in the system or overlooked in the system, it's not going to change. So I think what's at stake is our culture, our loss of our family structures. And with that, I will just leave it open for everybody else to answer.
Well, one of the things I was hoping that we could discuss as far as this act is being a relative care provider for my child. When I got guardianship, it was an unsupported guardianship, and Maddox had just gotten a feeding tube. His food to go in his feeding tube was $600 a month. We lost Medicaid. We lost daycare. Of course, we lost foster care payments that I was fortunate to be licensed, because a lot of grandparents are not licensed and don't get any help. So, it's just myself and the baby at home. So it's a very hard. I work in child welfare, so I don't make a lot of money like everybody else in here. But I'm fortunate because I had a job. We have grandparents that show up all the time where the states are trying to force them into a guardianship where they can't afford it. So I'm hoping that this act will help us build structures that can provide help for relative caregivers in the future.
I think what I'd like to do is piggyback off of what Robyn has said. I was a grandparent. When we had gotten the children and we basically had them in our homes, all of a sudden I was single, so I had to get 3 beds all of a sudden. I had to buy things I've never had to buy before, groceries, and because I was by myself. But the necessities of just toiletries, things that clothing. I mean, we didn't know. It was just amazing what we had to do all of a sudden. And where are you going to get that money? You never saved up, and all of a sudden, yesterday you were single, now today you got 3 kids. With the structure that we were under, we didn't get any provisions. When we were still in Kentucky after we lost my son, we basically had no assistance for food stamps for 3 children, housing provisions from Section 8, even Habitat for Humanity denied us. But mainly what happened was that we finally got to ourselves where we kind of pulled together from other grandparents within the Commonwealth of Kentucky that were like us. And noticeably what they were going through, and noticeably what I was going through, and then what some of my family members on Navajo were going through, is that we have children who are traumatized to no end. They're put into a caregiver situation. Now they have no support. There's no resources. Some of the social workers, and I really am not putting down social workers that have not the experience. If they come right out of school, I mean, I'm glad you're there, but you have to have the experience to see what's going on with these children, provide us some resources so we can, if we have a child who's addicted to heroin, how are we going to get this baby to stop crying? How are we going to get my granddaughter who's starting to cut herself? What are we going to do about these things? We don't have the provisions. So I think initially I'm coming as the capacity as a grandparent, that we have grandparents as myself, I'm 60 years old. I've seen some that have their 70s, carrying around babies, bottles and things at stores and stuff, and that should not be. They have to have some type of support. So I leave it to you, and thank you very much for me speaking.
I think that's something that Family First will change for a lot of us, is the support for kinship care. And I think that's awesome. And so we have one question left, but I know that we don't have a lot of time. Anybody can answer this. How do state agencies and tribes partner optimally, can you guys help me say that? Align with that vision.
Well, on repeat.
I would
Yes.
like to say that in the state of Oklahoma, I'm very fortunate to work with, in collaboration, a lot of the tribes work in collaboration with the state. And I know that that's something that other tribes in other states aren't able to do. We meet, at least quarterly. Sometimes it's monthly. We've been doing this for several years, and while there is still a lot of work to be done, at least we're getting there. And so hopefully with this act, tribes will be able to collaborate more fully with the state agencies that, you know, ultimately have control over what's going on. So that's also a goal.
I'd like to see tribes be able to access the funding even if the state doesn't apply for it. I think that's really, really important. We have a really high rate of out-of-home placements in Indian country, and I think, you know, the funding for Family First will definitely help with prevention and programs and kinship care, and open up a lot of homes for us, because a lot of families can't take in families if they can't afford them, you know, so.
And I also, being from Minneapolis, we have a high American Indian population. And so I think that there should be some consideration for urban communities to access funding, because a lot of our agencies are doing some of this work already, very amazing for communities, accessing funds for housing or cultural funds or cultural programs around chemical abuse that keeps mom and babies together, and that's preventative. But so making sure that those agencies have access to funds as well.
I think one thing I'd like to just say, just very briefly, is the people in this room need to remember us. Remember what we said, remember our plight. When you go back, please reach out, look to see what you have that you can bring back and make changes, because we're not reinventing the wheel here. We basically just want the dignity back, to bring our families back together.
And let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And a special round of applause to Shana.